This is DJ Chuang, host of the Erasing Shame podcast. We're into our second season, and so glad that you could join us. And what we like to do here is to have honest talk about healthy living, emotionally, relationally, mentally, and personally. And today we are honored and privileged to be joined by Dr. Pong Rhodes, and she is in Minnesota. So welcome, Pong. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, DJ. It's good to be here.
And we are going to talk about healthy living in a Hmong American community. And well, let's hear the background of your story so our listeners and viewers can get to know you and get to know the Hmong Americans.
Sure, thank you. So I know, DJ, when you and I first talked and got introduced to each other, the whole idea of even names came up. And so for some of you probably may know me as Dr. Pong Pho, which is the way you would pronounce my name in Hmong. Others of you would know me as Pang Pho, and then others as Pong. So multiple names in the community as well as even in my personal life. And that's just by way of saying that there's a multiplicity, there's a complexity to my story, as I think is true for many immigrants and for Asian Americans as well. So I am Hmong. My family is originally from Laos. And before that, my ancestors came from China. And so we are people who are kind of marked by being immigrants and refugees and not really having a settled country. So I am one of many generations that has moved around. My family came to the United States in 1976, and I turned 5 when we arrived. So I got to start in kindergarten all the way up. And some people would consider me second generation because I grew up speaking English. However, as a 5-year-old, I was already fluent in Hmong. So I myself consider myself 1.5 generation. I grew up in a really small town in Iowa. And so again, just the context of my growing up was bicultural right away and learning to adjust. So as a 5-year-old, socializing into the Hmong community as well as learning to socialize into the dominant culture. That was interesting, and it has really shaped who I am. My brain thinks in English, but some of the metaphors I use, I'm very just visual. And so a lot of that is Hmong, and the way I tell stories is very circular, which is kind of Hmong in training and in thinking as well. So I like that I have this complexity in me.
Well, that's a rich history and experiences that you can bring to people of a wider range of life. And for many of us who have an immigrant history, it can be quite challenging to navigate multiple cultures, and to have someone who's lived it is a very valuable thing. And so the Hmong Americans don't get talked about as much as some of the other Asian American groups that are more populous. And I think with Hmongs being the minority of minorities, the immigrants of immigrants, refugees of refugees for so much of their history, there's something that we can really learn from the Hmongs. So share with us what it's been like for the Hmong American experience, and what are some of the struggles that they face in particular in adjusting to American life.
Sure. Much of the early history books that were written about the Hmong would say that we've always been the outsider wherever we've lived, whether it was in northern China and then moving down to southern China, then moving into Laos, Vietnam, Burma, that area, Southeast Asia, that we've always been seen as the outsiders who didn't have a place in the culture, didn't belong. So I think that historical trauma of being displaced and not having a home nation, not having a visible national leader, that has kind of seeped into our psyche of survival. Wherever you go, don't assimilate completely, but stay kind of in on the down low so that you escape the radar. So kind of learning to conform while rebelling. I don't know how you can do that, but we Hmong have kind of perfected that. Fit in, but rebel in your own way so that you remain distinct.
Okay.
That's an interesting part of even the way that I've been shaped, that I can, fit in my workplace, and yet in my mind and in how I view myself is very distinctly Hmong, or that I want to maintain that.
Oh, that's really fascinating, because often for the second generation, those that are born in America and have an Asian heritage, they have a difficult time holding on to their heritage and their identity, and yet the Hmongs are able to do that. And you mentioned workplace. So what kind of work do you do now that can inform our listeners on
my primary job is I'm a professor, and I teach at a local university called Argosy, and I teach marriage and family therapy. So on the side, I also have a small private practice where I see primarily couples, but also individual and families. And the majority, almost 90% of my clients are Asian American. And because I live in the Twin Cities, where we have the greatest concentration of Hmong in the United States, right here, so then I have quite a large number of my clients are Hmong. And I'm just beginning to see in the last 2 or 3 years, second gen Hmong coming in for therapy, seeking it out.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you're fluent bilingual and you're able to provide your services to both generations?
I am fluent in Hmong, and I think that has really helped being, that when we came here, I was already fluent, I already knew the language, and then learning English. So I dream in English, but I can very much converse in Hmong as well.
Oh, that's
so my
good.
Clients usually will do a little mix of Hmong and English.
Neat. That's so neat. So as you work with Hmong Americans and you live amongst Hmong American in a multicultural community, let's see. Oh, I lost my train of thought. I had a good question all set up.
It'll come back.
It'll come back as I ramble through. But so how, in working with people, how do you help people who are just surviving and they've got such a strong mindset to hold on to that? How do you help them to say that life can be more than just surviving? You can move towards thriving.
Yeah, I think part of the people coming to see me is they're already realizing that. They don't want to just survive. We have a saying in Hmong that marriages can become a situation where you're just two rotting logs holding each other up. And so one of you can't leave or the other log will fall, but that's just life. You just want to stay standing up. And many people are getting to the place where they're like, we don't want to just be a rotting log. We want to thrive. We want to be alive and to produce and be healthy and happy. It's interesting that this idea of happiness has really entered our vocabulary as well as our way of life and our wants. And so this idea that in my marriage, I want to be happy. As an individual, I want to be happy. In my job, I want to be happy. And that can actually create generational rift, because the first generation or my parents' generation may be like, you don't need happiness. As long as you're fed and you have a job and you can feed your children, you should be happy. That should be enough for happiness. And so this idea of thriving and using all your gifts and all your potential and availing yourself of all the resources so that you can thrive, that's a new concept to like my parents' generation. However, for the second and third generation, that's part of the acculturation that has happened, that they are much more open to availing themselves of all the resources available and opportunities available.
Yeah. So we'll come back to the some of the issues that stand out as you work with Hmong Americans, but there's certainly a huge hurdle or barrier to to invite people into a therapeutic relationship, and to realize that they don't have to have a low bar on life, that there's more. And there's probably fear on taking that step. There's probably some shame involved in a shame-based culture. And I'd like to have you elaborate on that. Are there particular aspects of shame that show up in Hmongs that are a little different than other Asians?
I think there's that foundational piece of shame being, kind of used to keep people in their place, or the threat of shame, the threat of losing face. So in the Hmong language, shame is really losing face. And that would mean that, if you do that, then you should be full of shame. But I think the biggest concept that the Hmong bring into shame is that it is so relational. Shame is relational. It's not about you. It's about your family, your mom and dad, your clan. What you do impacts the reputation of literally hundreds and thousands of people. So the weight of, I have to perform well, I have to toe the line, I have to appear as though I'm doing, well. That could be a huge responsibility, because it's not about me, it's about the collective.
So how many years have you worked with Hmong Americans in that context?
Yeah, so my husband and I moved to the Twin Cities in 2001. So it's been 17 years being in the community. And early on, it was really people who were referred by the courts to get therapy that I would see. So it tended then to be older generation, like first generation Hmong. And nowadays, it's very much second gen who are seeing troubles in their marriage and are now taking advantage of therapy for that.
So almost sounds like, because it's so collective and relational, maybe there's some things that you're beginning to see as a way to help the community rather than just the individuals that come in for a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, so I found that if I just do public education, psychoeducation, go to conference and deliver a message, that you could sit in the audience and take away, training skills and not have anyone know, okay, I need it personally. So that certainly has helped to get the word out about therapy, as well as that there are skills that we can learn, that we can all learn. I often have to deal with the fact that some of the skills I'm teaching are countercultural. And is that okay? So I've had pushback on, are you teaching us to be more Western? And in full disclosure, I should tell you all that my husband is Caucasian. So that adds a layer of people saying, well, you don't really understand our marriages, our families, and what you're teaching us is a Western way of communicating. And you know what? In some ways, they may be right. Because when I teach them to, turn to each other and look at each other, that is very non-Hmong. You don't make eye contact with people when you're talking to them, and when you're showing respect. And yet I'm saying to them, well, when you do that, how do you feel and what's the response? And by and large, most of them would say, I feel validated. And I would say, okay, it's a new skill. We can learn some things from Westerners, and Westerners can learn a lot from us. So there are things in the way that we relate to each other that I do not want to get rid of. There are certain things that we do that are not healthy and not helpful in our relationships. So I really try to balance it.
That's wonderful.
I've had to learn to do it with my husband, where we've had to kind of negotiate, okay, how Hmong am I in this relationship, and how Western American, and he's had to learn to adjust, to be much more collectivist. And I've had to learn to be more assertive.
Yeah.
So I can't help but bring my multiculturalism into my therapy, as well as to help couples say that, the marriages that worked back in the homeland or back in Laos or Thailand, wherever they're from, they don't work here now because you have lots of other alternatives, and people are dissatisfied. They are unhappy now because they compare, my relationship with that other couple's relationship. Whereas in Laos, maybe most relationships look like that. So there was nothing else to compare it to.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to hear what you're doing, and hopefully that this episode makes awareness even more widely available, so that people can begin to see and hear, and maybe you'll take that step of a leap of faith to experience. Let's see how life could be different, and make decisions in that way. So as people come to you, and I was surprised to hear courts were involved, because usually when we talk about Asian American issues, there's not courts involved. So what are a couple issues that are particular to Hmongs that you work hard to help heal?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the first generation, or the court-related stuff, and then about some of the more contemporary current
Sure.
issues.
Good.
But early on, I would only see clients if their children were in trouble, whether with truancy or when in school, or delinquency and things like that. Then the courts would require them to have family therapy or parenting skills, and then that's how I would see them. Other situations would be if there was a divorce and it was contentious, and something happened where someone had to come in and teach them skills before they could proceed, or something like that. And so early on, it was very much involuntary therapy. But recently, couples and individuals have reached out to me for help of their own volition, because they are seeing that, so in the younger generation, they're actually seeing a lot of acculturation issues.
Okay.
I'm much more open-minded and Western. My husband is more conservative and traditional, or my wife is, doesn't understand my need to listen to my parents. So it's very much relational issues from their both being bicultural and trying to navigate how acculturated do we want to be in our relationship. And again, I do believe that part of that has come from being introduced to other ways of being. So the more exposure you have to different ways of being a couple, you might now get to choose, well, I would rather be a couple like this than like that. So a lot of acculturation issues impinging on the marriages.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you for sharing that. It almost sounds like psychotherapy in that context is more about practicing new skills in communicating with each other, rather than doing a lot of introspection and trying to make sense of a broken narrative, although that's there also, right?
It is there. And actually, once I teach the skills, then we actually go on to talk about the foundational, the underlying, which is that there is a clash of values. And
then earlier you mentioned trauma also.
Yeah, and trauma. So there's a lot to unpack. I start with skills so that they have something to kind of hold on to early on. And then when we unpack the, well, I value this and you value that, or you're doing this, like going to college, means that I will lose face because I don't have a college degree. And so then we start to unpack the values of that shame comes in, right? Losing face, or not being man enough, or I'm letting you walk all over me as a woman, and I lose faith in that now. So there's a lot of digging deep into the culture clash that happens when we are faced with multiple cultures that we could take on.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I heard, or I'm inferring from what you said, that even successful, accomplishing, going to college could cause the others to lose face in the community.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
I've known of some women, particularly
Mm-hmm.
women, who stopped going to college or dropped out of
Mm.
their educational path because it would make the husband look bad,
Wow. Mm.
particularly if he wasn't educated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so in order to not shame her husband,
Mm-hmm.
she would make that sacrifice. So
Yeah.
again, shame is very relational
Yes.
because what you do impacts my reputation and how people
Mm-hmm.
see me.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Profound challenges there, and glad that you're doing the work. As we wrap up, Hmong Americans sound like they're not exactly at the place of being featured as model minorities. Um, and they're refugees, they're immigrants, they're just getting acclimated, moving from surviving to thriving. What is it that other Asian Americans can do to advocate and understand Hmong Americans?
Yeah, I think for the longest time, because everywhere we've gone, we've been the outsider. That even here in the U.S., being a really small Asian American minority, we tend to get lumped in with as just Asian Americans. And so it's interesting that you would mention we're not the model minority, and yet in Minnesota we have, you know, state representatives, state senators that are
Hmm.
Hmong. We have very
Oh,
successful Hmong doctors, lawyers, and all that. And then it kind of obscures the fact that the majority are still just surviving.
mm-hmm.
So there's this duality where we don't want to focus just on those who are struggling, but the
Mm-hmm.
flip side is they can be seen as, oh wow, in 40 years you've advanced so fast, and
Mm.
so then it neglects the needs of the community, and so there's that tension of when you meet someone who's Hmong, you don't know where they are on this, on this acculturation spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and just because someone looks acculturated, they dress, they speak, they have a job, doesn't mean that in their psyche and in their values and the way they live back in the community isn't very traditional. So I think that's probably what I would say to other
Mm.
Asian Americans is have deep conversations, because you never know how traditional, I guess is the only word, culturally traditional someone is. And
Okay.
I've certainly learned that in doing second generation ministries in a church setting, that the second gen, the parents think the second generation is worlds different than they are. They're not. They're just maybe a step different. But
Mm-hmm.
they grew up Hmong, they were taught Hmong values, and again, that collectivist relational component of I need to do things that honor my parents, it's still very deep in second and third generation Hmong.
Well, so good to hear. Thank you for your words of encouragement, and really commend your work in the Hmong American community. Dr. Hong Rhodes, thank you for being here on the Erasing Shame podcast. Stay connected with us at erasingshame.com, and you can subscribe and watch on your favorite social media channels. DJ Chuang signing off, and we'll see you next week.